So before we embark on Beloved, I think it is important that we just remind ourselves of what we mean by the Gothic genre. Obviously, there are videos on YouTube you can watch about this, but just according to the Cambridge Companion to Gothic Fiction, Gothic representations are a product of cultural anxieties. I think that's key there. Cultural anxieties about the nature of human identity, the stability of cultural formations and processes of change. They retain a double function in simultaneously assuaging and intensifying the anxieties with which they engage, hence the persistence of Gothic throughout the 200-year period associated with modernity. And I think what's key about that quote is that it's about humans and their identity and the impact of culture and how culture helps us form identity and form ideas, and also exploring change. And I think because these things are still relevant today, this is what's made the Gothic still so very. So in changing times, a narrative form that confronts the consequences of loss of faith and questions established notions of social order and justice can always lay claim to continued relevance. And that's what the Gothic is. It will always question established notions of social order. In traumatic periods of history, traumatized heroes may represent contemporary uncertainties and insecurities, and that's key, especially when we're looking at Beloved, because it is about a traumatic period of history. Again, in changing times, a genre that deals so frequently with metamorphosis is likely to prove attractive, and again, I think that is so essential for Beloved. So I think when we look at it, we look at the Gothic as a hybrid form. It draws ideas and inspiration from Shakespeare and medieval ballads, from folklore, scientific speculation. Certainly, if you're looking at something like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that's certainly the case. And I think in this lies its further strength. So modern forms of the Gothic will include cartoons, comic television parodies, profusion of graphic novels, and apparently an endless desire to reinterpret the tales of Dracula and Frankenstein through film. And if you've looked at the series that I've done on Dracula, you will note that certainly there are at least 13 aspects of Bram Stoker's Dracula that are used in most stories about Dracula. The Gothic explores the nature of narrative itself, and that's what it is. It's about how does the author, it's the AO2, how does the author construct the narrative? How does he create or she create a sense of alienation and fear? And the Gothic helps us do that. The Gothic and the supernatural. So readers and audiences of the Gothic and supernatural find themselves safely positioned spectators, observing representations of terror where the victim is someone else, but constantly invited to identify with the central protagonist and question their own morality. So the Gothic and the supernatural genre allows us to play it safe. We, the audience, or the reader, we sit and we are not part of the story. We're very well aware that it is a story, and it enables us to enjoy the fear and the terror and know that we are in essence. And I think it's definitely safe to say that the Gothic is embedded in our culture. If you look at any television programs or you go through radio times, you will always find that there is some sense there's something Gothic, and we wouldn't obviously have the idea of those movies Saw and all these ones about being hidden in cabins and Sharknado, and all this idea of supernatural weirdness would not be as popular. I think again though, just to look at that, Whitby, obviously where a lot of Dracula is set, has a twice yearly Gothic festival, and of course these are the kinds of things that make the genre so popular. We've also got the idea of the Goths themselves and music and the makeup. But before we look at cultural ideas, I think we need to just dig down and look at what we mean in terms of the Gothic narrative. Now, I'm using the word Gothic, and I think we need to look at Gothic and supernatural interchangeably. So it's the idea that there must be a problem in the narrative. There's the problematic nature of the narrative itself. And especially in Beloved, this is so important. We've got certainly self-conscious narrators. There's definitely duplicity of narrative. We've got real issues with the way the narrative is put. and that's in terms of time as well. The time shifts from one to the other, and a Gothic novel places a great deal of emphasis on the question of time. So you need to consider whether the plots of the texts are driven by past trauma, definitely in Beloved, or a response to a significant event, which would be, again, very important in Gothic is the idea of change and transformation, be it sudden or slow. There may be regular breaks in the narrative, and events may not unfold chronologically, and they cannot be more applicable for Beloved. Beginnings and endings, obviously their significance must be made in use, may be made at the beginning and the end of the narrative. Again, Beloved starts with 124 with Spiteful, which is just such a clear and important idea that this house has been personified, and this house is supernatural. The tale may achieve closure through the defeat of evil. Not necessarily the case in Beloved, but there's certainly a realization that slavery is evil. More modern Gothic tales will often resist comforting conclusion, and certainly that is what Morrison does. There is no happy ending. The Gothic protagonist may not be easily characterized as objects of fear and loathing, as society may not be returned to its former stability, and that is the case, I think, in Beloved, because there is nothing that can make up for slavery. Obviously, Gothic literature has always operated within religious context, and the fondness and exploration of the supernatural could be regarded as a quest of a form of religious experience in an increasingly secular age. Please remember, God is also, the whole idea of religion and God is also supernatural, because that is what the supernatural means, something we are unable to explain. So let's have a look at Beloved itself. Obviously, it's historical fiction. There is elements of truth. It's a Gothic horror. It's a buildings romance. So for those of you who don't know, it is the idea of it follows someone's life, and it's kind of the idea of growing up, and it's a journey. Okay. What do critics say about it? Well, it's a blackface Holocaust novel. It's a reclamation of slavery, an ineffable quality that is curiously black, a milestone in the chronicling of the black experience in America, and that it transforms the sorrows of history into the luminous truth of art. Again, and finally, a history of the present. As you go through the text, and especially once you've finished reading the text, go back and have a look at these comments. To what extent do you agree with the why? So, looking at Toni Morrison, born February 18th, 1931, in Ohio, and she is still alive. She's an African-American writer and professor. She grew up in Ohio. She developed a love for literature and storytelling, and studied English at Howard and Cornell universities before teaching English. Her first novel, The Bluest Eye, was published in 1970, and she has continued to write and gradually became more popular, and especially garnered a lot of attention before publishing Beloved in 1987. So Beloved is written in 1987. It was hugely successful. It won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction, and it's often included in any discussion when exploring what could be the best novel written post-World War II. In 1993, she was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. So majority of her writing focuses on black women in the United States, and she's actually currently a professor at. So what are the key facts we need to know? This text is set in the outskirts of Cincinnati, Ohio, in the years just before 1855, and directly following the Civil War, which was 1873, and its flashbacks to Sweet Home Plantation in Kentucky. The climax of the novel is the revelation of Setha's attempt to kill her children, and she successfully murders her baby, or her 2-year-old, to keep them out of slavery. And the women of the neighborhood surrounding 124 and sing outside the house, which drives Beloved away. So that's the climax of the novel. The antagonist, there's no clear antagonist, unlike, say, Dracula, where Dracula is the clear antagonist, but at various moments the novel's characters struggle against slavery, racism, school teacher, Beloved, and the past. And the point of view is third-person omniscient with first-person passages from of view. Again, exploring form and style. It's a stream of consciousness novel. It talks about a journey. There's dialogic narrative. Time is elastic. Please remember, none of the story is told in chronological order, but is made up of flashbacks and interior monologues. They also make use of character as metaphor. So Beloved herself is form. So what is the related historical events you need to know about? It's related to events surrounding the Civil War. We looks at, especially you need to have knowledge of the Fugitive Slave Act, which allowed Southern slave owners to travel north and reclaim their slaves that had escaped from ownership. And that is the situation where Setha finds herself trying to kill her child because she has traveled north and a school teacher has come to reclaim them. The novel is inspired by a true story of Margaret Garner, a slave who did escape with a family across the Ohio River in 1856. Slave catchers found her and she did kill her 2-year-old daughter rather than seeing her daughter become a slave, and Garner was taken back into slavery. So Seth is based on this. Again, Morrison says she found the story a little limiting, although it's true, but she has taken the story and she has made it hers, and she has created this experience that is. It's also just this is the kind of thing for when we're looking at moving up in the grade boundaries. You need to be looking at the fact that it's full of allusions to the Bible, from the four horses of the apocalypse to Baby Suggs's miraculous feast, which is like which brings to mind the feeding of the 5,000. And there's also lots of allusions to the Bible throughout the text, which we will be. I think it's really important that we know that for Toni Morrison, there is no memorial that is enough to encompass or stand for the slaves. There are those people with these memories that are written, and as a modern reader, we are unable to, or especially as a modern British audience, we are unable to understand the full extent of the slavery. And this is Morrison's attempt to commemorate, and when we look at the dedication of 60 million and more to whom she's dedicated this text, this is her way of reminding us that this is not something that should ever happen again. So she says that putting just a bench by a road to bring in memory, to stand as memory of all those who suffered is not enough, and that's part of her book. And however, based on what she said, the Toni Morrison Society has now gone and installed the benches as well as part